The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi everyone, welcome to today's Sedona Seminar, Job Costing How-To, run by Support Specialist JessLynn Lupo. We're gonna just kick things off here and let people trickle in as they will. JessLynn, are you ready for me to share your screen?
I am.
Working on it. JessLynn. Sorry everyone, having trouble finding JessLynn's screen. JessLynn, are you? Looks like you are up right now. All right, whenever you're ready, we're ready. We look forward to this presentation.
All righty. Welcome everybody. I'm JessLynn, Support Specialist. So we're going to be talking about job costing today. That's a very broad term because it could include the setup or the adding of the costs or the reviewing of the costs. We're going to touch a little bit on all of it. I'm going to try to focus in on the areas where I get the most questions in support. Things like the custom job buckets. I think everybody knows they're there. Not everybody knows how to use them. So that kind of thing. We're going to touch a little bit on everything. If there's anything that you need more detail on, you can ask a question at the end, or if it's more specific to your company's setup and a complicated thing like that, let us know after the call and we can do an individual live assist with your company and help you get job costing working the way you need it to. But anyway, that's what we're going to cover today. I'll talk a little about WIP, accrued income. So let's get into it. Most of you probably already know this, but I just wanted to put the basics out there. So we're talking about job costing. We're talking about your expenses and revenue for a job and what the profitability for that job is. So the account types we're hitting are revenue and cost accounts, obviously. Your costs are material, labor, commissions, other, and now we have custom, which in the end gets rolled into other, but you can make your own custom costing buckets. And then we have accrued income and WIP. So for those of you not savvy with accounting, those are kind of like holding accounts where your revenue, you don't want it to hit right now, this month. You want it to hit next month. And so it sits in your accrued income account until it's ready, then it hits your revenue. Same with WIP. Your costs are on the job, but you don't want those costs to hit your actual cost account yet. So you put them in WIP, and then when you're ready, the cost relief. And then the last one I listed there because those are included in the entries that get made when you enter costs on a job, deferred labor, commissions, and overhead. But don't worry about them too much. They don't really affect what we're going to be talking about today. They're just the offset entries. That's why I made sure to include them. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about accrued income and WIP. So one of the big questions I get is, why use WIP? And the answer is let's say you have a really big job and you're buying all of the parts for that job right now in November, but you don't plan on invoicing that job until December. If you're a small company or you don't report on a monthly basis, then it may not make a big difference when those costs hit. But if this is a very large job and you recognize all the costs right now, your income statement is going to have a ton of costs on it. It's not going to have any revenue because you're not billing them until next month. So it's going to look very disjointed. You got a huge cost and your profitability is way, way down. So a lot of companies, what they do is they say, okay, don't make those costs hit my accounts yet. Put them in WIP first. WIP stands for work in progress. I'm not done with this. It's in process right now. Put the costs in work in process, and then when I invoice in December and I'm ready, then have those costs hit. And then you don't have costs hitting in November and revenue hitting in December. Instead, everything hits in December and your income statement looks better. It looks more accurate, to what your actual profitability is. Instead of having huge swings, it looks like you're taking tons of losses and it looks like you're having tons of gains. Kind of evens that out. Same with accrued income. Less companies use that. It's not as popular, but it does the same thing. Instead of, normally when you invoice a job, your revenue is going to hit. Well, when you use accrued income, instead, your revenue kind of hovers in that accrued income account, and then when the job is closed, that's when your revenue hits. So I get lots of questions about those. If you guys have more questions about them, go ahead and ask them at the end. We can always come back to these ideas. So the setup tables, where are we listing what GL accounts are going to get hit when we enter costs, when we enter revenue? These are your three primary setup tables, and I listed them in priority order. What that means is, for example, you can enter a material WIP account on all of these three tables. Let's say you did that. Let's say you entered a different account on each of these three tables. What is the system going to do? Because it can only use one of them, can only hit one account. Well, it'll look at your job types table first. Whatever's entered on your job type, it's going to do that. If there's nothing entered on your job type, it'll say, okay, what does the install company table say? It'll use that. And then if it doesn't find anything in either of those two, it'll go to setup processing. So you have this flexibility of the three different places you can enter it because we have lots of different companies, a lot of different ways they want to recognize their costs. So you have a lot of flexibility there. One thing that we see a lot is people entering everything on the job type except maybe the labor accounts. And then the labor accounts they'll enter on install companies because you might have a subcontractor install company, and when they do work, you want it to go to a different place than if you're the one doing the work. So that's what we see a lot. That's why we have the different setup tables there. I'm going to actually show you those setup tables now. So we'll go into Sedona Setup. I'm going to scroll down to the JM section. Here are all my JM, Job Management Setup tables. And we'll go to Job Types. So if I select one here, you can see on the front page, here's my material WIP account. That if I enter a part and I want to use WIP, the cost is going to hit my WIP account first. Then either when it's invoiced or when the job is closed, that WIP is going to relieve. And where is it going to relieve to? Here's my COGS account that I selected. For miscellaneous WIP, for other charges, miscellaneous charges like that, this is the WIP account I'm telling it to use. Notice I don't have a cost account for miscellaneous expenses. That's because a miscellaneous expense is something that you enter on a bill or a check and you code it to the job. If you do that, then when you enter it on the bill or the check, you have to pick a GL account. So you don't have to pick a GL account in the setup tables because it's going to use whatever GL account you chose on the bill or the check. Below that, you'll see we have the accrued income account. And again, that's for holding revenue and if you want to wait to recognize revenue until the end of the job. And then here we have the costing tab. That includes costing for your labor, your commissions, your overhead. So overhead is another one that I get a lot of questions about. So most companies include their overhead in their technician pay rate. So when you go and you enter a time sheet on the job, the system has a rate that they multiply, labor hours, 4 labor hours times your pay rate is $25 equals the cost of your labor. What most companies do is they'll take that $25 and it won't actually be how much they pay the customer. It'll be a burdened labor rate, how much they pay the technician. So it will be the technician's pay rate plus the overhead amount that they want to put on their jobs. If you do that, then you do not want to use this section. If you do that, if you're using a burdened labor rate, then you're already including your overhead in your labor, and you don't need to put it here. If you're not doing that, if the pay rate of your technician is actually what you pay your technician, then you can enter your overhead in this section. You're talking about entering a cost account and a deferred account for overhead here, so the system knows what GL accounts to hit when you enter, or when it enters your overhead. And then over here, you tell it how should it calculate overhead. You can do it as a percent or a flat amount, and this is based on your technician's labor, so it's still based on those timesheets. When you enter a timesheet, if you enter, let's say, 4 hours of time, then if you do a flat amount, and if it was a flat amount of $5, it would be $5 times the 4 hours that you entered on the timesheets, and you've got a $20 overhead charge. Or if you do a percent, this means the total amount of labor on the job was $500, and you're going to take 5% of that and add that as an overhead amount. It's all still based on labor, which is why a lot of companies just cut out the middleman and they just say, I'm just going to use a burdened labor rate. But either way, it's up to you guys. If you do use a burdened labor rate, remember that's entered on the technician or installer table in the actual technician. So not part of the actual job setup tables. So next is install company. You have less options here, but like I said, you've got the labor option because a lot of companies like to divide out, their subcontractors from them actually doing the work. You can list different WIP accounts, miscellaneous or parts here, but you don't have to list anything here. If you've got it set up on the job type, then no entry is needed. It'll just do whatever's on the job type. And then again, you can have your overhead calculate. It's going to do the same calculation. Doesn't matter whether you enter it on the job type or here. It's the same setup. It's just how you want that to go by install company. Do you want your overhead amounts to change based on install company? Do you want them to change based on job type? Same with labor. If you enter it here, you're doing it by install company. Do it on the job type, you're doing it by job type. And then your setup processing, again, you get all those same fields. The cool thing about your setup processing is this also acts as a default. So if you put entries in here and then you go and you create your job types, it'll default in some of these GL accounts. So you don't have to constantly be reselecting them. But it won't use anything on this screen unless you're not using your job types, if you left it empty, which I don't recommend doing. We have very few companies where it would be a good idea just to rely on general job setup. I really recommend setting up your jobs based on job type, entering the different GL accounts there. And then everybody's favorite, the custom job costing buckets. So what I've seen a lot of people do is fill out this tab and then that's it. And if you do that, you have named the buckets and nothing else. So there's a two-step process. So first you set up what the bucket is named, whether or not you want to use WIP. You don't have to. You notice we have one on here that doesn't use it. And these are what we generally see people use as most frequently done ones is subcontractor, freight, and equipment rental. But you can do whatever you want. You can name them anything. And then step 2 is job expense types, this table right here. Create a new expense type, and it does have to be a new expense type. If you already have one, for example, we already had one when we came out with the custom job buckets, so we had to make a new one. So you make a new expense type, and then you assign it to a custom job bucket. You can have more than one go to the same bucket. So if let's say I wanted subcontractor expense and permits and fees to go to the same subcontractor bucket. You wouldn't necessarily want to do that, but if you did, then you could just change this to a 1, and now they'll both, it doesn't matter which one of those you pick, they both will go to the subcontractor bucket. Where do you use these? In case I've lost you, remember if you're entering expenses on a bill or expenses on a check, you're going to pick your expense account, and then you're going to pick what the job costing expense type is. So let me just pop back out there and show you real quick. Right here, this field, when you're entering anything on a job or for a job, you're going to fill out what type it is, and that's how you get it to hit that bucket. And you guys will have access to this PowerPoint after we're done. Isn't that correct, Sam? You're going to post this PowerPoint for them?
That is
Okay.
correct.
Well,
That will be up by Monday at 3 p.m.
alrighty. So you'll have, I've just put quick little step instructions in there on how to do that in your setup tables. So that's basically set up. We have a lot to cover, so I'm going to move on from that. I'm sure people have questions, and we will definitely get to those. But the next part that I want to look at, so we have it all set up. We have told the system what accounts we wanted to hit. How do we enter things into those accounts? So your revenue, you create an invoice. And as soon as you create the invoice, that's when your revenue account gets hit, unless you set up that accrued income account, in which case that's when it hits accrued income. If you use accrued income, that will be relieved to revenue when the job closes. One thing I wanted to point out, you'll notice that I didn't show you where you could list what revenue accounts should be hit by the job. That's because it's not part of job setup. When you create an invoice, you're going to be listing invoice items on it. And invoice items is a setup table in accounts receivable. And when you set up an invoice item, you can see over here, it lists what revenue account it's going to go to. So you shouldn't worry too much about that. That's in your AR setup. When you create that invoice, it knows where it's going to go. So that's how revenue gets hit. For your parts, when you enter parts on a job, it's when they are issued to the job that they're going to hit your costs. So I get this question a lot. I have a PO on my job, but it's not showing in my costing screen. That's because your purchase order is your intent to buy something. It's not actually issuing parts to the job, so that's why there's no cost. There's two ways to issue parts to the job. You can either direct expense the parts on a receipt. So it's when you receive the PO and you select direct expense, you bypass inventory, and those parts go directly to the job. That's the first way to issue them. Second way is to go to Tools, Issue Parts, and actually issue them from your inventory. Once you do one of those two things, that's when your part costs are going to hit your job. For commissions, as soon as you enter them here, that's when they'll hit. The one exception to that is gross profit commissions. Gross profit commissions are based on your gross profit, and since you're constantly editing your jobs, the job doesn't know what the final gross profit is going to be until you close the job and it's done. So gross profit commissions will hang out there, and then when the job actually closes, that's when they'll hit. So for that reason, it's important, and just in general, because you want to make sure that your job has all the details on it that it's going to have. It's important to try to do commissions later on in the job process, especially if it's going to be, if you're going to be making a lot of changes to the job. That way you don't have to come in here and constantly be deleting and re-adding commissions. It's best to do that towards the end, maybe right before closing. To enter labor, most of you are going to have your install company set up. I'll bop back there really quickly so that you can see. Most of you will have your install company set up so that they automatically, see this auto button? Create timesheets when you create appointments. So what does that mean? You guys are probably used to scheduling your jobs in the service module, hopefully, and then either someone in the office or the technicians themselves, if they have the FSU, they go in and they enter their times. If you have this set to auto, then when you finish that appointment, a timesheet's going to get automatically created, and you don't even have to worry about it. If you have that set to manual or you don't enter appointments, then you would have to manually come in here to timesheets and put a timesheet in. So your costs for labor hitting your job are dependent on these timesheets. If you set up overhead, like we talked about earlier, if you use our overhead feature, when you enter the timesheet is when the overhead's going to hit. So you'll have an entry for every timesheet that you enter for overhead. And obviously, if you are using a burdened labor rate, then you won't have that entry. It'll all just be included in here. And I think everybody knows how to invoice. We're not going to cover invoicing a job today, but if you guys have questions, of course, you can always send us a ticket in. But just once you invoice a job, however much you've invoiced of the jobs, let's say you invoice 50%, the job will relieve 50% of WIP. If you invoice the whole job, the job will relieve all of WIP. If you enter things into the job after that, after you've invoiced, then that WIP's not going to be relieved until you close the job, and that's when it'll all come out and it'll hit your costs. So let's look at the actual job costing screen. I want to show you, I made up a little diagram for you. Let me see if I can move that off the screen there. So here's your diagram for your job costing. Your estimated column, how much you estimate your costs will be. Revenue is automatically updated by billable amounts you enter on the job. So if you bill for parts, if you enter install items, that's automatic. You don't have to do that. Costs, you have to hand enter. You have to type those in for the estimates column. Actuals, these auto update when you bill or when you enter a cost. Your variance, it just takes your estimates minus your actuals, gives you the variance. And then you have your WIP up there in the top right. If you have WIP on a job and you're trying to evaluate how profitable a job is, just because it's not in your cost account doesn't mean it's not a cost for the job. So we want to show you that WIP. We want to show you, yeah, you only have $50 in actual, but you've got $5,000 sitting in WIP. Don't forget about that when you're evaluating this job. So that's why we show you that there. And then your RMR down at the bottom. What a lot of companies do is they'll sell jobs at a loss, expecting to make that money up over time through the recurring. But the recurring itself isn't something that you're doing for this job. It's something that you're going to do over time, the next few months, however long they have the recurring. So it's not included in your estimates and your actuals because it doesn't have to do with this job specifically. It has to do with your services to the customer over time. So we put it over there in the corner. And if you do sell the job at a loss, you get the payback period included in that little corner, and it'll tell you how long the recurring has to run until it starts to become profitable. So here's the diagram in real life in action here, your estimates column, where you can hand type in these things. You'll notice you actually have some buttons here. So these buttons are auto-calculate buttons. So I can hand type in, I can say, I want this to be, 5,700. Or you can hit this button and the system will calculate an estimate on parts for you. How it does that, it goes to your materials tab. It looks at what parts you've entered. It looks at what parts you've entered, and it looks at what the cost of those parts is in the part setup, and it'll auto-calculate what it estimates your cost for parts is going to be. It does the same thing for labor. It looks at if you have any estimated labor units up here, it'll look at those, and it'll estimate what your labor is going to be. And for commissions as well, if you have gross commissions that haven't hit yet, something like that, it'll pull your estimates. So this button is for your labor tasks. It's more for planning out how you're going to do the job. So, I think I'm going to spend 4 labor units on engineering, and you enter that in here. It doesn't connect to anything. It's a place where you can come and you can see, here was my plan. Here's my labor plan. When you actually enter labor on the job, that'll pop in here too, and you'll notice you get a scroll bar. So now, before I could only see the estimates, now I can see the actuals. I estimated I was going to have, 4 of engineering. I actually have 6 of architectural drawing. That's what I've actually entered under my timesheets. I have a button down here, include WIP amounts. So really, my part cost is whatever costs are actually in my cost account plus whatever's in my WIP. Because remember, the WIP's going to get relieved and it's going to come join the part cost eventually. Those are costs on this job. They're just hovering over there in the WIP account until I'm ready to recognize them. So technically, my part costs for this job are these 2 numbers added together. If everybody doesn't want to do the mental math every single time they want to come into job costing, we understand. So we give you a little button here. It automatically adds these 2 columns together, shows you what it would be like if all your WIP was relieved. Now, again, shows you what it would be like if the WIP were relieved. The WIP is not relieved. You'll notice when I click that button, these amounts didn't disappear. They're still technically in WIP, but this is a way that you can view them and see what the variance is without having to do the mental jogging. So let's say I'm looking at my job costing and I want to see there's something going wrong with this job. I estimated I would have 5,000 in parts, but I've got 8,000. That seems very high. What went wrong? This is the question we also get a lot, and I would recommend the best place to go to look is the GL. That's because the GL is where this costing screen pulls its numbers from. So if you go to Journal GL, you can see here all the entries that have been made, and you can see, for example, this is a receipt. This is a labor timesheet being entered, you know. I can see this is where it was invoiced. And you'll notice all of the places where amounts hit your costs account, all of the places where amounts hit your revenue accounts, they show in color. So revenues are blue, costs are red. You can see them. You'll notice that if it went into WIP, it doesn't mark that as red because it's going into WIP. It's only when it comes out of WIP and hits costs that it shows as red for you. Same is true for your revenue. If you were to use accrued income, it wouldn't show blue until it actually came out of accrued and hit your revenue. So if I'm looking at this and I'm trying to see what's going on, I notice that there's a receipt from today for about $2,000, which is right around the amount that I'm off by. You know, it says I've got $8,000. That's way too much. This is a possible suspect for what might be going wrong. And it'll show you, and I forgot to put a receipt number in there, so I apologize, but it'll normally show you the receipt number. This one doesn't have one. So you can see what receipt it is, what receipt number it is. You don't have the vendor, but if you want to look that up, you can always go to Tools, Purchase Orders, and see, oh, there's my PO for $2,400. That's vendor triad. Now, a lot of you guys have really big jobs, and it's not going to be as easy as simply looking at the journal and going, boom, there it is. You know, it might take a little bit more scrolling through. You might have a large list of purchase orders that you might have to look through. But the answer is going to be in there somewhere. You're going to find a place where costs hit where they shouldn't have, or where costs should have hit and they didn't, you know, depending on what your issue is. So if I want to find this receipt, I know it's vendor triad, so I'll go to vendors, triad, and I'll go to my receipts, and there it is. And this, I set this up on purpose because this is probably one of the most frequent issues that we see customers have with their parts is wire should be set up to buy it by the box and sell it by the foot. So you have a package quantity of however many feet are in the box. And in this case, I just entered a part that had 500 feet in the box. So my guess is that when this user put this in, they didn't really need 30 of them. They only needed one or so. And then another thing I noticed is this standard cost is wrong. If a box of them costs 80, then the standard cost should be by the foot. It should be 16 cents, not $80 per foot. So I've got some adjustments to make here. I'm going to change this to 1 because it's silly to think that the person bought 30 boxes of wire for this one job. So I'll save that. And then also I'm going to fix that standard cost. Go out to the part here. I'm going to change my standard cost to 16 cents like it should be. So now, and let me put a receipt number in there so that you can see that more easily when we're looking at the job. Oh, let me put a receipt number that hasn't been used before in there. Okay, so now if we go back and we look at our job costing, and I include WIP amounts, okay, that's much better. I'm still over a little bit on my parts, but that makes much more sense than what I was seeing before. We get that question a lot about wire. Just remember that the best way to set it up is you order one box of however many feet, and then your standard cost is per foot. The system is intelligent enough to understand that you want to order it by the box, but sell it by the foot. So if you were looking in here and you saw an issue like that, that's what I would do. Now, one thing I haven't shown you yet is the costing details right here. this tab. If I click on that, this shows you basically the same thing as the GL, but it gives you different information. So example, for example, if I go to issues returns, I can see there's the wire. So you get different information depending on where you look for it. If I go to journal GL, here's the receipt that was causing me the problem, and here's the receipt number. It told me that, you know, it was a receipt, and here's the number of the receipt. If I go to cost details and I look, I don't know what the receipt is, but I know it was for wire. So you have different information in different places. One thing about the cost details, the GL will always match your job costing because that's where job costing pulls its information from. Your cost details are usually the same. They can sometimes be different. Let me explain. Let's say you had a receipt that came in and you direct expensed it to the job, costs hit the job for that receipt. And then the bill comes in and the price on the bill is slightly different. They added something else to the bill and now it's showing as different. In that case, both your receipt and your bill are going to hit your job. They have to because you have to record all the costs. But when you show it here in the job costing, you're going to see both. You'll see the receipt and the bill. And if you count both those twice, you're doubling up your cost for that item. So rather than going through and totaling all these and saying, oh my gosh, they don't match my job costing, there could be a reason for that. It could be because you know, the cost for the receipt and the bill had to be shown, so we had to show you both, and now you've got it, you know, you've got it listed there twice basically. But that's why job or cost details is just for giving you a general idea of what you're looking at, for helping you research issues. If you want to see where the actual amounts are coming from, I would go to the journal. But you can see if you had issued a check to the job, if you'd had commissions entered, that's where all these things show up. I will say I had one time a customer who was having trouble because they had a revenue account listed on a bill on accident, because you have you charge your customers for freight, but you also get charged freight by your vendor. Well, someone had accidentally selected the freight for the customer on their vendor bill. And the way we caught that was because we were looking at the journal and we saw that it was a bill, it was labeled bill, but it was showing blue for revenue. You should never make money paying your vendors. So that's how we were able to catch it. So we get a lot of tickets in about how to troubleshoot when you're looking at something on a job that doesn't look right. Those are the places to go. I'd go to your GL, you can go to your cost details, go to both places. Get all the info you can about it. It should help you be able to track it down. And if all else fails, we're always here for you. So far, we've talked about setting up the jobs, entering the costs, and then viewing the costs on the individual jobs. But if you had to go through and view each job individually, that would take forever. So we have reports, so you can view them all at the same time. So you can review all your jobs, see if anything looks odd, and then at the very end, you can see what your overall profitability is for all the jobs you're looking at the same time. And I get a lot of questions about which job report should I use. So I went ahead for you guys and listed out the details of these. They're mostly all the same. They just have very little variances. A lot of them were custom made for customers. People said, you know, I have to be able to see this field. I don't need this field. And so they commissioned us to make reports for their specifications. That's why you get so many that pretty much look like the same thing. So for your cost reports here, your basic one is your job cost summary. It has various criteria. What we mean by that is you can select, I only want to see jobs for this branch. I only want to see open jobs, or I only want to see jobs created between these two dates. That's what we mean when we say criteria. What am I looking at? And then when you open the report, it shows your customer number, job number, customer name, etc. It shows estimated and actual labor units. It shows estimated and actual costs, revenue. It has a row for WIP, and then it shows you your profitability, your total costs and total revenue and profitability. Let's pop over to the next slide. I'll show you. This is kind of an example. This is a really short one. I just threw one together just to show you what it looks like. And then you have your total down here, which happens to be the same because we've only got one job on this report. But if you had multiple jobs, you'd get your total. You'd see overall what it was. So this is your base. This is what we're starting with. This is what we're looking at. We've got our sold amount here. Here's our estimated part costs, our actual part costs, our WIP. When you get your total, it's not adding everything. It's just adding your actuals and your WIP together. And then over here, you've got your profit. The other reports are all very similar. When I listed them here, I listed what their primary differences were from the report that came before it. So there's smaller differences here and there in what your selection criteria are, but for the most part, these are the big differences between each report. So your job cost summary number 2, basically the same as number 1, except this one shows you what your RMR amount was for the job. Your 3 it's got considerably more different from number 2. It shows you your RAR amounts as well. I think it shows addresses. It doesn't show WIP, so this one negates WIP. And again, why did we do this? Because somebody asked us, can I have a report that shows, and specifically asked us for these things. Job 4 is much like job 3. And then the big one I want to point out to you is your transactions. So the transactions report, when you run it, looks almost identical to just your basic job cost summary. The big difference here, when you run your job cost summary, there's an as of date. Let's just say we picked today. If we did that, it's going to show you what your jobs looked like as of today. Any GL entries that happened today or before are included. When you run your job cost summary transactions, you give it a date range. So let's say I told it I want to see everything for the month of November. If your job has been open since October and there were entries made to it in October, but you run the transactions report for November, it'll only show you the things that happened in November. It won't show you the things that happened before. So that's why the transactions report is different. It looks the same, but it's doing 2 different things behind the scenes. It's showing you either all the transactions from the date you specify and before, or it's showing you just the transactions in the date range you specify. There are 2 other reports. I put them on a different slide because they're named differently, the estimated versus actual by salesperson. This report is actually very similar to the others. It's just another job cost summary. The big thing is it's grouped by salesperson. So it's just like your job cost summary reports. The job utilization also basically does the same thing, but it looks very different, which is why I wanted to include a screenshot of it here for you. It's got a lot of extra fields, and it's showing you bill date and payments, things of that nature. So that's a unique one. It's got a lot of extra information if you need that. And then the last thing I wanted to show you is the Job WIP Monthly Audit. So this report shows the changes in WIP over time. We recommend balancing this to your GL once a month. Go into your GL, make sure that the accounts for WIP match what you're seeing here. If you have multiple WIP accounts, make sure to add them together when trying to balance it to these numbers. But that should be something that we do once a month to make sure everything's tying out, just like you would your AR account or your AP account, making sure it all matches. Just recommend that you do it with your WIP account as well. So I think I kind of flew through this a lot faster than I expected to, but I'm sure there's tons of questions. So Sam?
Hey, JessLynn. We actually just have 3, but I have to apologize to Tom Kane. He asked at one point, can you show us the actual steps to run the job cost reports as you're discussing right now? Tom, if you are still here and want to clarify at which point we were, JessLynn, I'm sure would be happy to run back through. So you can just type that into the question box, but we will keep moving down the line. Next question. As a suggestion, when reconciling a job, it may not be the same person who is closing the job. Many times, the job is not reconciled properly and only comes as a problem when closing the job. And then Mark continued. If when reconciling the job, there was a way to know if everything is properly reconciled instead of only instead of only at closing job. So it sounds like more of a suggestion, which we will take note of. Correct, JessLynn? That's what that sounds like?
Yes, it sounds like an enhancement, but I'd like more details on that.
Yeah.
If you want to take note of it, Sam, we can contact him outside of this because yeah, I'd like to know at what point specifically. Yeah.
And then so we'll get back.
I can show you though. In answer to the first one, I can show you in here how to run the reports. So the reports are under Report Manager. It's not in Job Management, it's in Report Manager. You go to your Job Management reports, and then here they are all listed, the same ones we just looked at together. Job Cost Summary, 02, 03, 04, Estimated versus Actual, your WIP Monthly Audit. So to run these, let me just start with our basic one. Here's your selection criteria. So it looks like a lot. Don't be overwhelmed. Here we just have, for example, if you wanted to run it by job type, if you want to see all of your jobs regardless of job type, just leave them all checked. Same for all of these. So if you want to see all your install companies, leave them all checked. If you only want to see one, uncheck the others. Up here at the top, this is what I was also talking about. You can say all open jobs, or you can say all jobs sold between such and such a date. So if I want to see all my November jobs, I could just say all jobs sold between and then leave November. Or if I wanted to see all jobs for October and November, I could do that too. Down here is my as of date. So if I do all open jobs as of when? As of today? Or maybe as of the 1st of November? That's what I can pick down here. You can do a group by, so I can group them all by branch, and in that case it will list all my jobs for the first branch, and then it'll list all my jobs for the second branch, and then it'll list all my jobs for the next branch. You do the same thing with department or install company. If you don't pick anything, it's just going to put them in job number order, which is also fine. And so that's what we say here, job number order. If you want to, you can make them sort by customer name or number. So that's what all these are. These selections will change depending on what report you're pulling. Here, let's look at the report real quick. So if I hit OK, it loads up. And you're probably not going to get a lot of great data here because this is our test database. So these jobs are probably all going to be non-profitable, and there you go. And you can export this, export to Excel, export to PDF. You can print it. But that's what it looks like. And then if I go all the way to page 85, there are my totals. There's my overall profitability. And we're getting garbage numbers because this is a test database, so I wouldn't worry too much about that. All right. But if you look at, sorry, I just want to find one here that looks different. The selection criteria are all slightly different, but there's one report where it's very different. I can't remember. Okay, so for example, if you run estimated versus actual by salesperson, you notice you don't get that many options. You don't have all of the different options you had before. You simply get to tell it, okay, what's your date range? And then do you want it for a specific department or do you want it for a specific salesperson? Those are your only options. But then when you run it, it looks very similar.
Okay, are you good for your next question, or do you have anything else to add to that?
Nope. I think that's how you would actually run them in the system.
Okay, perfect. We'll keep going down the line. Our next question is the parts calculator based on the standard cost for that part or the most recent purchase?
It's based on the standard cost. What's based on the most recent purchase is what populates into the PO the next time you create it. So when you create a bill for a part, then whatever the last thing you entered on a bill for that part was, that's what's going to pop up on the next PO as its suggestion for the cost when you create the next PO. But when you're actually doing your costing and when it's actually valuing your inventory, here, let me get back to the job. That button's going based on your standard cost.
All right. Is there a job costing report to where you can choose specific multiple jobs to cost together?
Well, they all have now specific jobs. So you mean I want to see job 1, 2, 3, 4 and also job 1, 2, 3, 8 and also job 2, 4, 6, 8 and just those three. There's nothing that's going to let you actually pick these are the jobs I want to see together. However, if you have all the jobs on the same customer, I think, and I haven't looked at this in a while, let's try to pick somebody who's got multiple jobs. You can do a job costing report for the site. So what I did was I opened a customer, I opened a site, and then I right-clicked on jobs. There's a job costing report here, and it'll pull. Now this customer doesn't have any jobs, and I don't want to spend a lot of time trying to find someone who would be a good example for you. But if you had multiple jobs on this site, it would list them, and you could select which ones you want to see and hit OK. And so just like you're talking about, you're selecting the specific jobs you want to see, and then it'll show you a report that's just those jobs. That will only work if all the jobs you want to see are on the same site. So if you're trying to view jobs from different customers, that it won't let you pull that. However, I'm not sure why you're trying to view specific jobs, but if it's not because they're all on the same customer, if it's because you're trying to see all jobs for a certain install company or all jobs at A, B, C, a lot of those things you can do in the selection criteria. So if you're looking, if you're picking these specific jobs because they all have the same installer or something like that, you can use your selection criteria to narrow down what jobs you're looking at.
Okay, our next question. If we use the custom job costs bucket, do those costs show up on the job cost reports?
Those costs will show on your reporting. However, they're going to show in the other bucket. So when you're viewing the individual jobs here, they show in their own buckets. You can see them separate. But when you run the reports, they're just all going to show in the other bucket. They're not going to show in individual buckets.
All right, we have kind of a tough one next. What's the best way to show all the cost amounts that hit a particular bucket? For example, material cost equals $123,456. Is there a way to drill down into this number to see all the transactions that total $123,456? Thank you, Darwin.
So what I would do is I'd go to cost details and then look at my issues returns. And it'll list there all parts that have been issued to the job. And then that's the best place to look at it. Again, I've seen places where the cost details don't always match, but if they don't, then that could be an issue, and you can look into why it is they don't match. I think this would be the best place if you're trying to drill into the material cost number. I'd come to your issues page and look at all the issuances that are listed, because this is going to include your direct expense and your issued from warehouse. You can see where it all came from. And if something here doesn't match, again, you go to your GL and you'll see every single place where it hit. But this is a lot more user friendly, I think. So this is where I'd come.
On job cost summary, what if I want to run it for just one job?
I just come here. You can't go to the reports and run one of those. You can't just say run this report for job A. But there's no real need to, because basically all this report does is summarize what you're looking at here. So if you're only looking at it for one job, I would just come here and print this job. And you know what you can do? You can print preview, and this is your job ticket. I think most people are familiar with the job ticket. A lot of people print this for the customer, but you can print it for yourself, and you can print it for job costing summary, job costing details. You can get those things to show on there.
Okay.
I mean, at that point, you're already looking at the job, so this is like an extra step you may not want to go through. I mean, you're already looking at the job, but.
Sorry, I keep jumping in on you, JessLynn, premature.
No problem.
All right. Next question. Typically, when we add a change order to a job, it gives us incorrect job costing. Doesn't seem like the labor and part costs auto-populate with the original cost of the job. Has anyone else experienced this? As a support person, do you get calls about that?
No. And if you are having that issue, I would put in a ticket to us. Now, if you're talking about the estimates column, these buttons that auto-calculate, they won't include if you make a change order. If you add a change order to it and you try to recalculate, it's not going to take those into effect. But it doesn't matter, because like I said, this is pulling based on your GL. So it doesn't care whether it's a change order or not. It's just going to pull what's in your general ledger. So if you're having that problem, definitely let us know. One issue I have seen is with the actual amount up here with change orders, but that has to do with invoicing. So your revenue from invoicing. We did have an issue, I think a version ago, where the change order revenue was having trouble displaying. We've since fixed that, but your costs, we do not have any known issues with your costs not showing. So please do let us know, send us in a ticket, and we can review that with you.
All right, when issuing parts from different warehouses into the same job, what is the phase section inside issue parts?
All right, so if you are on, and this kind of has to do with job costing, that's okay, we can review it. So if you're on your tasks of your job, you'll notice every phase has, or every task has a phase code. So these are all phase 1. A lot of our customers, they don't use phases, which I'm guessing the person who asked the question doesn't. So everything's just phase 1. But if you have a larger job, let's say the job's going to take place over the course of a year, and you need to buy a ton of parts for this job, but you don't need to buy them all right now. You need to buy some now and some later. So what a lot of companies do is they'll have, okay, so we have all of these tasks are phase 1, and then they'll go in and they'll add new tasks, and I'm not actually going to add this task because it's probably going to bark at me, but and then they'll put all those tasks as phase 2. Or phase 3, or phase 4. You can have a ton of phases on this job if you want to. You can make it very complicated if you want to. So you have your first parts ordering in phase 1, and then you have another one in phase 2, and then you have another one in phase 3. So when you go to your materials tab, you list a phase on each of these parts. So this part, I'm going to issue that in phase 1, but this part, I don't need it until phase 2, and then you save. So when you go to Tools, Issues, you pick your warehouse, and then you pick your phase. You're saying, I'm issuing parts for phase 1. I'm issuing parts for phase 2. And the system goes, okay, what are all my phase 1 parts if you pick phase 1? If you pick phase 2, it says, okay, what are all my phase 2 parts? And it'll offer to issue only the parts that match the phase you selected. So if you have a very, very large job, this is a way of helping you organize that job and order the parts you need at the time you need them, not order everything at once and have all those costs hit at the very beginning. You have a bunch of parts sitting around your warehouse you don't need. This will help you organize that. It also works with invoicing. When you are entering an install amount, you'll notice this has a phase 2. And so when you pick the phase, you're telling it, okay, when I invoice for phase 1, only pull the invoiceable items that are listed for phase 1. Don't pull the ones for phase 2. And then when it comes to phase 2, it'll pull the ones for phase 2 and so on. So that's what phases are for.
Okay, can you sort job costing reports by project manager?
There are a few that look at project manager, and I don't know if you can sort based on that. Let's go back to some of these actually show project manager on there. Where did I see it at, or where did I write it at? I think it's on the utilization report. Aha, so job cost summary 5. It includes the project manager on there. So, but you wanted to be able not just to see it, but to sort by it. Let's go look if Job Costing Report 5 allows you to sort by project manager. It does. So you'll see right here at the top right, it allows you to pick what project manager you want to see jobs for. Now, this isn't the only one, because as you recall, these reports build on each other. So the Job Cost Summary 5 WIP also is going to show project manager. And I think the Job Utilization Report does as well. Yes, this one shows project manager as well. So you got a few different options there.
All right, we have multiple PMs at our company. Oh, that was in addition to that first project manager. All right, so that has been answered. All right, part of our task list is to reconcile the job, and this is the responsibility of the purchasing/inventory department. When this is accomplished, the job task is completed and sent to the next department. The department closing job tries to close, but cannot because not all parts were issued properly.
Okay, so you're running into that because maybe you have a task here, the task right before the last task that says reconcile job. So to us, the English reads reconcile job, but SedonaOffice doesn't read English. It doesn't care what you wrote there. It just is there to remind you to do that task before the job gets closed. So there's nothing that's going to stop someone from approving a task that says reconcile job if the parts aren't reconciled. There's no way to get it to stop doing that. Let me phrase it another way. The job is set up to prevent you from closing it if the parts aren't reconciled, but there's no way to prevent you from approving a task that somebody named parts reconcile. So there isn't going to really be a way around that. I think I would just recommend that if your person closing the job gets that error, just have them unapprove the parts reconcile task, send it back, have them try it again.
All right, if we are not using the job schedule and it is flagged on auto, that is the same as having the flag set to manual. We import timesheets.
Yep. Oh, no, not if you import timesheets. Okay, if you're not using, if you're not creating appointments, then effectively, yes, you'll have to create the timesheet. Even if it's set to auto, but you're not using it, then yes, you're going to have to manually enter it. But if you're importing the timesheets and you're entering, job and the task and everything, it's going to hit the job anyway. So you're fine. And you'll notice you do have a payroll timesheet option here on the job as well. It'll show you what came in through payroll if that's how you're entering it.
All right, so I don't know if either of us are authorized to comment on this one, but are there any plans to have a FIFO option available for parts?
No. So I've heard that requested once. So this will be the second time I've heard that. It's something that a couple of customers have requested. And it's not something that they've said, no, we will never do that, but it's not something that's planned right now. If there's a lot of you out there that feel that way, that this is something that your business would really benefit from, let us know. The more people that send us in, the higher up the ladder we can shoot it. But yeah, they haven't said no. They haven't said it's a bad idea. It's just not something we're working on right now.
All right. Job then has to go back to department reconciling. There does not seem to be a way for them to tell if things are issued correctly. And
there is.
JessLynn, you got it.
Right there. Yep. Parts reconcile. So your person who's doing the parts reconcile, now I think this is, Sam, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is related to the question that was asked earlier, yes?
Yes, same guy, Mark.
Yes. Okay. So when I said you have to send it back to the person who's doing the reconciling, I assumed that person was doing their reconciling based on the parts reconcile. So this screen, this will tell you if all your parts are reconciled or not. If you have any parts that are in red, then that person should know not to send not to approve that task and not to send this job on to the closing people because it's not reconciled. So, so yes, I suppose there is a way to help you out with that issue then. Just have, before your parts reconcile team sends it to the closers, have them go to Tools, Parts Reconcile, and make sure nothing is red. And as long as nothing's red, then your closing team's not going to have problems when they try closing it.
All right, next we have, maybe this is a silly question, no questions are silly, but on the jobs profit and loss report, if we run all jobs, our overall margins are so much higher than when we selected closed jobs with a date range. Any input is welcome. Sorry, I kind of butchered that, JessLynn. Tell me if you need me to repeat it in English.
No, I understand. Here's the issue. If you want us to look at that specifically, go ahead and send us a ticket in. What's difficult about that is that if you're running it, let's look at all open jobs, and then let's look at all jobs closed for a date range. My first thought is that you're not looking at the same jobs. Even if you say all open jobs for November, and then December comes and you say, okay, show me all jobs that were closed in November. Those aren't necessarily the same jobs. Just because it was open in November doesn't mean it was closed in November. So my first thought is you're getting wildly different numbers because you're not looking at the same jobs all the time. But if you feel like there's more to it than that, and there's a specific report you're running a specific way that you're doing it, you can send us a ticket. We can look at it deeper with you.
All right.
Sorry, Sam, I'm done.
It was halfway when I got into the meeting. All right. So late joiner here. We do issue parts from receipts, and oftentimes when you go to materials, it triples the parts, and I have to go to the materials and delete them one by one manually. JessLynn, do you have any suggestions?
That was, okay, so there's two possibilities. One, when you direct expense, it adds the part to the materials list. So if someone has already added the part and then you direct expense it, but the first one had like a location or something, to make it different, the system will think, oh, this is a different part, and so it'll add it again. That's a possibility. However, I think what the user's running into was an issue we had in a prior version. So that's not something that you would continue to have after you update. If you do, let us know. We'll look at it with you. It is normal for parts to be added to the materials list, but not to duplicate themselves.
All right, next question from Corey Boggs. Will the estimate for change order show on job cost reports?
Yes. It's because it's all the same. So maybe clarify, maybe I need a little bit more clarification on the question, because you only have one estimates column. So you don't get, even if you add change orders, you still only have one column. You'd have to come here and change this number.
All right. Sometimes when you go to part reconcile, the job quantity and the issued quantity matches, but it still will not allow to close because it shows as materials are not properly issued.
Yep, materials not properly issued as direct expense is what it says, and that's not the problem of whoever did the reconciling, so that would not be one of the cases where I'd say send it back to them. Go ahead and send that to us, and we'll run a script that fixes it. What happens is if you direct expense or delete an issuance, it has to do with a delete. So I don't remember if it has to do with deleting a receipt or deleting an issuance, but one of those, when you do that, it breaks the link, and then everything's reconciled, but the job can't double check that because the link is broken. So we go in there and we'll put the link back, and then the job will say, oh, okay, yes, I am reconciled, and it'll let you close it. A good way to avoid that would be don't delete issuances. If you can avoid it, don't delete receipts. Change them instead. You know, change a receipt to go to the warehouse instead, or change a return, do a return to stock. Let me show you that. Tools, issue parts. You have a return to stock box here. If I decided I didn't need these parts, don't hit the delete button. Check the return to stock box and then hit apply. It'll send it all back to stock, and then you'll show the return and the issuance in the job, both. So that will help keep the link there so that your job doesn't get confused when you try to close it.
All right. When I go to job costing under actual, I have no info until I click on include WIP amounts.
Yep, so this is what we were talking about earlier. What shows in your actual is just what's actually in those accounts. So your amounts that are in WIP aren't technically in your cost accounts, so they don't show there. This button is there so that you can more easily value your jobs, because the amounts that are in WIP will be in your costs eventually. Either when you invoice or when you close, these amounts will move out of WIP and into your actuals. And so this button exists to allow you to see what those costs will be after all of the WIP is relieved. So clicking that button is perfectly fine. I mean, that doesn't sound like there's anything wrong with your jobs. It's just you want to view it in your cost column instead of viewing it in your WIP column is basically what you're doing when you click that button. The amounts are still in WIP. They will relieve when either the job is invoiced or closed.
All right, JessLynn, it looks like that was our last question on the Jobs Costing Sedona seminar. You've been fantastic as always, and we will have this webinar posted for all of our attendees on Monday the 20th by 3 p.m. Eastern Time. Thank you so much for coming, everybody, and we will see you at our next Sedona seminar.